My name is Victor Fuhrman. Some call me the Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. 47 years ago, Michael Tobin discovered his soulmate, Deborah, on a dance floor in Keene, New Hampshire. It took her soul a few years and an around-the-world bike trek to fully reciprocate. Riding the Edge, a love song to Deborah, is the astonishing tale of the 6-month odyssey that profoundly shaped the next 564 months of their lives together. Taking place in 1980, Michael and Deborah, an American Jew and an American Arab respectively, leave the security of their well-ordered lives as psychologists, sleepwalking toward marriage and family to explore and take risks in search of life's larger truths. What they find is a story of magnificent vistas and memorable moments that open their senses to the beauty of the world, even as it also reveals the vilest of human cruelty. My guest this week on Destination Unlimited, Michael Tobin, has been an author and playwright since he was 12. On his way to becoming a psychologist, he was a former U.S. Army officer, glacier climber, marathon runner, and restaurateur. Life dramatically changed for him and Deborah in 2018 when she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. This book tells the story of their experiences and deep and abiding love. His website is drmichaeltobin.com, and he joins me this week to share their journey and inspiring book, Riding the Edge, a love song to Deborah. Please join me in welcoming to Destination Unlimited Dr. Michael Tobin. Welcome, sir.
Welcome. A pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Before we start discussing the book, please share with our listeners what began in the latter part of 2018 and became the impetus for quickly finishing and publishing the book.
Okay. First of all, I have to change one word that you used. It wasn't quickly. But other than that, I'll answer your question. Okay, in the end of 2018, Deborah and I climbed the Everest Base Camp, which was actually our 5th time in Nepal. We had done a lot of high mountain trekking in Nepal. And I had noticed on the trip that there was something uniquely different. I mean, the environment of the trekking community is one in which there are no borders. Everyone is in the same difficult condition of dealing with cold and poor food and poor accommodations and altitude, et cetera. And it's a place where you make connections very quickly. But I noticed there was something peculiar about the way Deborah was interacting. Deborah was always a kind of private person. She was someone who was able to listen to other people and extract incredible personal information within a rapid amount of time. But I know she was sharing things about the trip that I eventually wrote about. She was just sort of very quickly talking about that experience, and it seemed rather peculiar, to say the least. And then I was ending up dealing with all the logistics. Deborah couldn't seem to handle the logistics, which was also so unlike her. Anyway, we came back from this, and we had talked about it. And in fact, we even went to a doctor in Nepal about it. And the doctor felt, because of her history with thyroid issues, that she had suffered from problems in the past, that was probably what was contributing to what seemed to be some confusion at times and extremely unable to deal with the cold. So we come back to Israel, where we live, and I think it was the first Friday after we had returned, and we were sitting at a cafe with our children, and a woman approached the table who shares an office. My wife was also a psychologist. She shared our office in Jerusalem, and she came up to the table to say hello. We were there with our children and I think a couple of grandchildren. And we could see, my oldest daughter and I noticed that Deborah didn't know who she was. Now, this is a woman she's known for 30 odd years, a woman with whom we've gone on multiple family vacations in the summer. We spent a significant amount of time at one another's homes. And Deborah would see her 3-4 times a week in the office. She didn't know who she was. So that was such a powerful wake-up call. Soon after that, we arranged for a whole series of neurological examinations at Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem. And sadly enough, based on neurological testing, psychoneurological testing, and multiple other kinds of testing, it was quite clear that she was in the beginning stages of Alzheimer's. And for me, especially, because ironically, I started my career as a psychologist in Boston at a place called Hahnemann Hospital in the early 1980s, working in a geriatric ward with Alzheimer's patients. So I had experience, and I should say, sadly enough, the progress in treating Alzheimer's in the 30 odd years since I first worked with Alzheimer's patients has been almost zero, other than some meds which increase a neurotransmitter to help a bit with memory. Acetylcholine is the transmitter. Nothing much has changed, sadly enough. So that was the wake up call.
Michael, how is she now?
Well, that's November 2018. So we're talking about 3 years. In that 3 years, she has deteriorated. It's a neurodegenerative disease. So deterioration is the only direction that a patient can go in. And so she's no longer able to work. She no longer is functional in most areas. She was an extraordinarily functional human being. We have a caretaker who takes care of a lot of things. She's has a number of issues. Cognitively, she's not great. Her memory is very poor. She certainly remembers me, and she remembers our children. And as I was saying to you when we were just first getting to meet, though, every now and then it's like that movie Awakening. Do you remember the movie Awakening with the patients who were in a coma and they were given L-Dopa? It was with Robin Williams.
Yes.
Okay, many years ago. And they all of a sudden awaken for about a 24-hour period, and then they go back into their comas again. Every now and then there's a kind of an awakening like feeling with Deborah, like especially if it's just the two of us. And I really spend a lot of time trying to really get attuned to her rhythm and connecting with her. And we had that on Friday evening, we had that kind of an experience. And I felt like she was so present. It was something very, very, very beautiful. And I have to give my credit to my oldest daughter. My oldest daughter said to me, she said, if it was in reverse and you were the one with the Alzheimer's, she said, Mom would know exactly what to do. She'd know how to be with you 100%. And I said to my daughter, do you think there's some things I should do differently? She says, no, you're doing a good job. She said, but really think about this. So I thought about that. And it's true. Deborah would have known exactly what to do. So I kind of took my cues from what I imagined Deborah would have done. And I did that. And I just sort of stayed with her and stayed at her pace. And it worked. It was beautiful. It was something very special.
What was
you have to be happy with those moments.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What was her awareness of the book as you were writing it? And was she able to offer any input?
Well, that's a great question you're asking. If you don't mind, let me give you a little background about the book.
Please.
About the history. Okay. So very briefly, the book, I began this book actually sometime in the 80s. We went on what I wrote about, this 6-month journey, bicycle journey that we went on. I had kept extensive notes and journal entries and letters back home and maps and photos, et cetera. I had a lot of, source material. At any rate, I always thought it would be a good idea to write about it. In 1988, I wrote about 40 pages, and I had an agent, and even had a publisher who was really very, very excited about it. He said it was reminded him of Zen, the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And he very much wanted to publish. It was a major publishing house, but in the end, the publisher said no because they couldn't figure out whether it was a travel log, a spiritual journey, a book about relationships, etc. Somehow with publishing houses, they can't deal with the fact that something can be hit multiple targets. At any rate, I put in mothballs. A friend of mine asked about it one time in around 2004, 2005. He read it. He said, "You got to write this." I wrote some more. Same story. Had an agent. Came close to publishing. They rejected it. I put it in mothballs. That was about 2007, 2008, and it stayed in mothballs. And a year after Deborah's diagnosis, and I cannot explain to you exactly why. And I'm a pretty rational individual who can explain, cause and effect realities. And I can't explain why, but I just said, you know what, I have to finish this book. So, finishing was not just a quick, it was, I'd say about 10% of the book was written. So I had a lot of writing ahead to do, but I was like I was a man on a mission. I had this inner drive, this inner necessity to write it. And I wrote it in about 10, 11 months, sent it off to a brilliant editor who specializes in memoir writing. And we worked it out and found a publisher, and the rest is history. And to go back to your question, I would write a chapter and read it to Deborah, and we would talk about it. Did she add material? I don't think she added material, but she certainly was moved by and it hit some chord with her because it was such an extraordinary experience, and it was a life-changing experience that she and I had together. So I said to myself at the time, whether I ever get a publisher or I ever, if anyone other than myself and she reads this book, I've already am a success just by her reaction. And of course, it's gone beyond that, but that alone was just very, very, very special. And then recently, Deborah reread the book, the final copy of it she read, and she was very moved in the reading. And so what can I say? For that reason, it was great. It was worth reading, worth writing it.
How did she react to your subtitle, A Love Song to Deborah?
Oh, you're asking Victor, you're asking terrific questions. And I have to tell you how I got to that. Riding the Edge was the title for since the 80s. It was a title, but I had played with multiple different subtitles. And the thing about a subtitle is in the subtitle, somehow what you're trying to capture is the essence of what the story is about, especially in a memoir. And I played around with things, a search for identity and love and blah, blah, blah. Everything sounded like a cliche to me. And a year ago, one of the things that I'm interested in as a psychologist is the use of MDMA and mushrooms as a psycho-spiritual experience, especially in the use of trauma. And because I'm involved with having done some of that, I also want to experience. So we did a guided journey. And on that guided journey, A Love Song to Deborah came to me. And somehow it seemed to tie the whole story together. And then I ran it by friends who were involved with the writing, were encouraging me to really do this. And the reaction from everybody was to start crying. Somehow I knew that we had hit it. Deborah's reaction was, "Oh, that's interesting." So it didn't resonate emotionally to her in the way it did to everyone else. Well, she wasn't against. She said, basically, well, that's nice.
Yeah. Before we talk about your journey together, let's start about your respective early paths and lives prior to meeting. Tell us about yours.
Okay, I was raised in Long Island, about 20 miles from New York City, in a place called Roslyn Heights. And I had, I would say, a, a relatively normal suburban life. And I was a fairly good student, a fairly good athlete, went on to university. I suppose the most significant part of my childhood was that my mother was diagnosed with cancer when I was 12 years old, and she died of cancer when I was 18, and had a very close relationship to my mother. So that was a very big loss for me. And it was very difficult for my father, and my sister at that point had already been married my mother died. That was probably one of the most significant events in my childhood. Then I went to New York University, and because I was a person who liked to party a lot and not be very serious as a student, I was on probation, and the U.S. Army drafted me. And I ended up going to the Army. Went into officers training and was set to go to Vietnam. And at the last moment, the Army sent me to Germany. I lucked out. And I spent 2 years in Germany, and then came back to the States and opened up a health food business. And eventually, I'm giving you a real shortcut here, and eventually decided for multiple reasons that even though we had a successful health food business, that I was interested in psychology. And so I ended up going to a program start up a program of 4 months. You know Jack Canfield is?
Yes.
Okay, so Jack Canfield and his wife at the time, Judy, had a program called the New England Center. And this is in 1974. And I ended up going to their program for 4 months, a program in humanistic psychotherapies. And then from there, I was accepted to graduate school, and then accepted to the doctoral program, and, did a lot of training in many humanistic psychotherapies like Gestalt and bioenergetics. And then I moved on to marriage and family therapy and did a 5-year postdoctoral training in that. I met Deborah in 1974. As far as Deborah's concerned, she grew up in Charleston, West Virginia, into a Lebanese Christian family. There was a fairly large Lebanese community in Charleston, West Virginia. And at any rate, at 16, Deborah became an exchange student to Sweden. And then Deborah went to Wellesley College. She actually was a peer of Hillary Clinton. I think Hillary was 2 years ahead of her, but she used to hang out in Hillary's room because her big sister, the woman who's assigned, an older student is assigned to the freshman students to look after them, was Hillary Clinton's roommate. So she went to Wellesley and also MIT. She was in computer science and French, and then she went to the Sorbonne. And Deborah was amazing in languages, and she studied. So she became fluent in 4 or 5 languages, and actually 5 languages. Post college, she ended up training to be a TM initiator with Maharishi, and was in Italy and Spain, and then came back to Antioch to complete her degree and in to go for her master's degree in counseling. And that's when she and I met. She initiated me into TM, and we practiced TM together for many years. Interestingly enough, I met Deborah on a dance floor, and I write about this in my first encounter with her. I met her in Antioch dance that they had, and we spent our first day together. It's going to sound strange, looking at maps. We both were in love with maps, and we were in love with traveling. And that was the beginning of our romantic relationship, over maps and dreaming about all the places in the world that we wanted to visit. And fortunately, together in our 47 years that we've been together, we've actually visited a lot of places in the world. So it has eventually come true.
And was her reception of you as immediate as your reception of her?
No, of course, not at all. I wouldn't say that she was turned off, did she? No, I was an engaging kid. I was an engaging person. But it's a very interesting thing. I've said about there. I don't know if you have this experience, Victor, but there are a few things in life that I've just known. Most of the time, I'm, like most of us, I'm not always that decisive. But there are a few things I'm certain about. And one thing I was certain about before I met Deborah was I was not looking to meet someone and settle down. I was finally finding a career path. The idea of becoming a psychologist was something I was passionate about. I loved it. I wasn't looking for a relationship per se. But when I met Deborah, there was something there that I recognized was so different for me. Part of it was not only did I find her physically beautiful, but in a kind of exotic way. And, that was very appealing to me. But I also found her intelligence extremely compelling. She was someone who I could share ideas with, as well as have fun with and dance and just laugh and have a wonderful time. We just flowed together. And I kept on thinking, this is it was so amazing. But I didn't push it. I just said, okay, fine. Felt like it was meant to be, and it was meant to be. And she realized it also. And then in 2005, about a year after we had met, after she was in France doing being a guide for a bunch of American high school students from the summer of 1975. After she came back, we started to live together in Vermont, and we were living in Middlebury, Vermont. And I was working at one of the local counseling centers, and she was working at a counseling center in Rutland, Vermont. And much of the next 4 or 5 years was spent really, focusing on our careers together. As psychologists, we both went to doctoral programs together, and we did a lot of workshops and training and what have you. And we were starting to build our careers there. And then we decided to say, okay, we're going to take a bicycle trip around the world.
And we're going to touch upon that in our next segment. My guest is Dr. Michael Tobin. His book is called Riding the Edge, a love song to Deborah. Michael, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you.
Okay. First of all, you can find out a lot about me at Dr. Michael Tobin, TOBIN.com. I also have a 20-part series on Psychology Today's website on marriage and marital affairs. And it's a 20-part series on how to affair-proof your marriage. There's many articles on my website, drmichaeltobin.com. And my book is available my book is available through my website. It's also available on Amazon in many, many, many different venues. My book is available both in print, audio, and digital. So easy to find out. Plenty of reviews. You can read the reviews. The reviews are thankfully quite excellent.
And we'll be back with more of Michael Tobin and Riding the Edge, a love song to Deborah, after these words on the OMTimes radio network.
The best of the holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. OMTimes Radio. IOM-FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week, Dr. Michael Tobin. We're talking about his book, Riding the Edge, A Love Song to Deborah. So you talked about how your relationship with Deborah ensued. You had your careers, your practices, and then recognize a deep longing for something else. How did this unfold?
Well, I think it unfolded in part because Deborah was having an enormously difficult time completing her doctoral thesis. She had a really tough committee, and they kept on sending it back again and again and again. I had much easier time with it, in part because Deborah's strength, she has so many strengths, but writing really wasn't her real unique skill set. I'm a much better writer than she. She was having a lot of trouble kind of, putting her thoughts into the kinds of sentences and paragraphs and what have you that her doctoral committee found to be compelling. So she did it again and again and again, and she was very persistent, and eventually she did a brilliant job. But the whole process, I think, wore me down as well. And I think that we were doing a lot of psychotherapy. We were doing a lot of spending time doing our research for our respective doctoral thesis. Our relationship was becoming, more and more tense with one another. When we both finished, I finished about 6 months prior to her finishing. I think it's sort of, I write about this, how it happened in the book. But I think we decided, you know what? Here we are in our early 30s. We are capable of picking ourselves up and taking time off and then relocating or returning to Vermont and resuming our practices. And we could do that. And we said, you know what? Before we have a family, but let's go ahead and give ourselves an adventure. And also let's put ourselves in a mindset where we don't know what the next day is going to be. As a psychologist, I know every single hour of my schedule. I can tell you exactly what I'm going to do 3:00 tomorrow. Okay. I mean, there's something stabilizing in that, and it's part of how you develop a career and make a living. But we wanted to get away from that. We wanted to go and say, okay, let's just get on our bicycles. I was a marathon runner and she was a yogi, and we figured we could do it. In fact, towards the last few months after we decided to go on this trip, and Deborah would go on a bicycle while I would go on my long runs training for the Boston Marathon. And so we got ourselves ready for this, and we got ourselves well equipped, and went off on May 30th, 1980. We left the States, flew to Brussels, and began our journey there. And the plan was to ride from Brussels to Paris, where we were going to spend about a month in Paris with an old friend of Deborah's from her Sorbonne days. And basically, that's what we did. I write about all that. The period of time in Paris was extraordinary. And on the way is when the kind of serendipitous kinds of encounters began. And we would just meet people so spontaneously. And strangely enough, the people we're meeting, like I would say the first major encounter was Le Clown, who was on the Brussels-French border, and he was a campground owner, and he appears sort of just out of nowhere, like ex nihilo. He just appears out of nothing. And with a parrot on his shoulder and a pirate's hat and orange coveralls. And it's extraordinary character. And he tells us his story that he was a partisan during the war and how he was very, very adept at murdering German soldiers and blowing up, German armaments and stuff like that. And how he sort of visualized himself into meeting what he felt were the needs of the time. So during the war, there was a need for partisans, so he was a partisan. Post-war, when Europe was suffering terribly and children were living in the streets, homeless and parentless, the idea of becoming a clown was what he decided was needed, and he became Le Clown.
Mm.
And it was a very, very interesting first encounter because I learned a lot about imagination and how, with the use of imagination, we can visualize and ourselves becoming something that might not necessarily be what we think we are. But through the power of imagination, we can create extraordinary change. And that's what Le Clown did. You know, I often think of like Lady Gaga, this shy Italian girl from New Jersey, who imagined herself into becoming Lady Gaga, you know, this outrageous, extraordinarily talented performer. So it's that was the first of what I would call the many serendipitous encounters. And it's like World War II followed us. It was 1980, so it was only 35 years after the war. So there were a lot of people who were in the war who were in their 50s and 60s, so they weren't that old. And we were meeting these people. Again, I wasn't like seeking it out. I wasn't going on I wasn't a war tourist looking for war stories. It just sort of happened. So
And again, we have talked about this in our private time together. Is this an example of synchronicity or some type of profound path that led you there?
it's a really great question you're asking, Victor, because I think that there are so many aspects of what it means to be human, and one of us is obviously the fact that we have choice and that we can decide, and we can set out a course of action for ourselves in life. And that all sounds very linear. And I think that is an aspect of being human that obviously separates us from the animal world, who work strictly on instinct. Yet on the other hand, to quote John Steinbeck, who writes in Travels with Charlie, he wrote, a journey has a mind of its own. There's something about surrendering also and giving up your will and saying things sometimes, these encounters, we didn't choose these encounters, they were there. And then I guess the question of choice is, well, how are you going to relate to these kinds of things that you didn't plan and didn't expect? And you can just say, oh, it's an interesting coincidence, and don't let it enter into your consciousness. Or you're going to let it move you and touch you. And I think that whether it was a conscious decision or an unconscious decision on our part, we allow these encounters to move us and shape us, not in any way at the time that I could identify or quantify. Yet that was what was happening. And that's, what I write about in the book, which is really, sounds like, what's his name? Gurdjieff, the Russian mystic.
Yes.
Encounters with Extraordinary People. I think that's the book he wrote. I mean, I could have entitled this Encounters with Extraordinary People, because that would, just another example. I mean, again, it's not a spoiler. I just this isn't it is sort of a mystery novel, but we were in a Holocaust photographic exhibit in Paris, and at the Pompidou Center, and the photographs were all on the wall of it began in the photographs from the 30s, the beginning of the rise of Nazi Germany, and into the rounding up of the Jews, and into the actual camps, photos from the camps, and all the horrific images from there. And the visitors were roped in, basically, in the sense that you walk in single file, and you have stanchions and ropes to keep you in single file. And as you watch the photos, and in front of us, we stopped, and there was a photo of inmates in a concentration camp, and the concentration camp was Theresienstadt. Theresienstadt, if you know anything about Holocaust history, was the showcase camp that was presented to the Red Cross as an example of how humane the Nazis were and how humane they were treating the Jews and the Gypsies and other undesirables. Any rate, then there's this picture of a bunch of inmates in front of one of the barracks, And Deborah was in front of me and I was behind Deborah. And he turns to Deborah. Guys, he must have been about 60 years old, attractive man. He's spoken to Deborah in very excellent high English. He said to Deborah, "You see this picture of this guy over here? That's me." And then we spent the next few hours with him in the cafeteria at the Pompidou, telling us about his experiences. He had lost something like 50 odd extended family members. He was the only surviving member of his family. He was from Holland. Holland had the highest death rate of any Western European country, the Jewish population. And again, it was a harrowing experience talking to him, harrowing and moving. And it was like, for me, it was as a very unaffiliated, uninvolved or apathetic Jew, it was like, oh, that doesn't matter what kind of Jew you are, because the Nazis would have killed me just as fast as they killed his family members, who also were very secular Jews. It sort of awakened me to the fact that you can't run away from yourself. If you run away from yourself, circumstances will remind you of who you are. So there were multiple experiences of that nature along the way.
How did these encounters change you individually and as a couple?
Well, again, that's why I write about that. Hopefully I write about that well. Subtly, I will say, because I'm not the kind of personality, and I think that's probably, I'll give myself some credit, I'm a fairly grounded personality, and so is Deborah. So we don't, I wasn't searching for an identity. I was already had a pretty good sense of self. I wasn't an 18-year-old kid. I had a lot of experience. I'd been in the U.S. Army. I had experienced a great deal of different things. Deborah had traveled all over the world and spoke multiple languages. So we were pretty successful individuals. And so I wouldn't say like I was all of a sudden, I was a different personality. I think the most important change actually is that kind of change that sort of slowly, it's like a gestation period. It slowly develops from a kind of embryonic stage into something much more identifiable. And I could see that slowly my thinking was beginning to change. Also, our thinking was slowing too, because we went from a very hectic lifestyle of seeing patients, clients, writing doctoral theses, training, to a very sort of meditative. On a bicycle, it's very meditative as well. So, I mean, sometimes it's really hard work and it's difficult too, as all of the above. But at times everything slows down.
Yeah.
So I think that because things were slowing down, it enabled us consciously and unconsciously to really absorb more data and also and more encounters, and to allow them to work through us. And like every evening, Deborah and I would have our kind of debriefing sessions where we talk about the day's events and what she was experiencing, what I was experiencing. So we were able to process a lot because of the nature of this trip.
On a very lighter note and a very delicious note, I would say that it's safe to say that most of our listeners have rarely read a book that made them salivate. Your description of the meals you shared on this journey are absolutely transcendent. Why was food such an important part of the story for you?
Well, first of all, I love to eat. That's I'm a foodie. I love food. I really do. And I love to cook. I'm very much into food. And Europeans know food much better than Americans do. And I'm musically practically tone deaf, but I have a kind of a sense when it comes to food. I can identify ingredients. So I have like, what's the word when you talk about someone who really understands music and is very whatever. I'm losing the terminology, but anyway, I had that sort of sense with food. So, and food was very much part of our social, encounters with people as well. Certainly when we were staying for a month in Paris, we had some incredible meals. And the French know how to have food, know how to enjoy food, and they know how to cook. And I very, very much appreciated that. And I also had, I can tell you, I've had transcendent experiences. I had a meal, a pizza, and I was trekking in the Alps with some friends, and we stopped off in Chamonix, France, and we went to this place and had some pizza with vodka sauce. I'm kind of Victor, I'm telling you something. I died and went to heaven. I can tell you, I can recreate the experience, and it was transcendent. And that's because, first of all, I don't look at spirituality as disconnected from the body either. And I think that I feel very strong. God put a lot of wonderful sights, smells, tastes in this world for us to really experience and to be fully present. It's part of this, in my feeling, it's part of the spiritual journey. I don't believe in disembodied spiritual journeys where you disconnect from the human body. We are embodied creatures, and we need to learn to relate to that. So, a little commercial for me about my, idea about spirituality. But
absolutely.
And I'm still a foodie, and I still cook, and this weekend I make some amazing soups. So I like Indian food a lot too. Spicy is better.
Listeners, you may just eat this book after reading it. His book is called Riding the Edge, a love song to Deborah. We'll be back with more of Michael Tobin after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Free your mind with OMTimes Radio, IOM FM.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free, ascendinghearts.com.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week, Dr. Michael Tobin, his book, Riding the Edge, a love song to Deborah. So you came back from your trip. What happened?
Well, we came back to the trip, and we got officially married in America. Deborah also in the process of this trip, and again, I've left out many details, but to the listeners out there, please buy the book. So I won't tell you now all of what happened. But at any rate, we came back to America, and we got married, and we moved to Brookline, Massachusetts, and which is where Deborah and I did a 5-year postdoctoral training in marriage and family therapy. And that's where we started a family. And three of our 4 children were born in Boston. And we developed a practice there. We were doing quite well. And I was also very much involved in running marathons. And Deborah was very much involved in yoga, teaching yoga, as well as her developing her own psychology practice. And there was a feeling, though, that certainly I had, and I think Deborah had less so, but it was also there, that I was missing Israel. I wanted to return to Israel and move there. And I felt when we were in Israel, and we spent a year in Israel on our trip, that there was some feeling of a sense of coming home. And I write about that and explain that, so I won't go through the explanation now. But a lot of old memories were rekindled, old, deep and profound connections to Israel from my own childhood. And I think Deborah also felt that the spirituality and the community there was something extraordinary for her as well. So we took our three young children, who were 4, 2, and 5 months, and in 1986 we moved to Israel. And the challenges of relocating were quite extensive. And yet we, with a lot of hard work and effort and good teamwork between the two of us, we built up a life here, built up a practice. It became, developed a whole training center. I also work with Israeli high-tech teaching leadership to CEOs, and which is a fascinating part of what I do. And developed my own sort of high-tech company, small scale, and it's been a very, very active life. And our children, although they're all fluent in English, they're real Israelis. They've gone to university here and graduate schools in some cases, and they're in business and what have you. And we have a whole bunch of grandchildren. So we've had a very interesting life. And also the nice thing for us about being in Israel is that it's 2-3 hours to be in Europe, to the Alps, to Paris, to multiple places in Europe, and it's not even that far, 7 hours, and we're in India and Nepal, which we've traveled to multiple times. And so I guess I had anticipated, I say that ironically, anticipated that Deborah and I would go into old age doing a lot of traveling, but I didn't count on her getting Alzheimer's, and I also didn't count on something that happened to me as well, which was we were trekking 2 years ago. We were in Scotland on a rather like a 150-mile trek, and all of a sudden my left leg was starting to drag, which was very unlike me. I'm an experienced hiker, climber, etc. And by the end of the trip, and when we arrived at Fort Henry, Scotland, my whole body was a mess. I was really dragged. I had real left-sided weakness, almost bordering on paralysis. And we went to a doctor in the Isle of Skye, and she thought I was having a stroke. But although cognitively I was clear, and we came back to Israel and went directly to the hospital to see what was going on with me. Turns out I had from C3 to C7 in the spine, in my neck, was one fused block.
Oh.
All of the discs. I was 1 month from total paralysis of the left side.
Oh.
So I went from I'm 75 years old now. I was 73 at the time. I was, an extraordinarily fit 73-year-old. So I went from, in a matter of moments, it seemed, because I didn't even feel any pain. I had no prior warning other than the dragging of my left foot. So I went from being a physically active guy to someone who today walks with a cane. So, that's life.
Yeah.
All I can say is, first of all, I feel blessed that I had so many years of being, having such joy from all of the extreme physical activities that I've had. And it's also because I'm not putting all that time and energy into training like I once did, it's opened up this whole new world of writing for me. So, one door closes, another door opens.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
I don't want to give a Pollyannish approach here, because I think that's, to think, Alzheimer's is beautiful, or being, someone who walks with a cane is just an extraordinary spiritual experience. That would not be dealing with the reality of loss and of going through a mourning process and coming to terms and being, all of the experience, emotional realities. I don't want to say that didn't happen for me. First of all, it certainly happened for me with Deborah's Alzheimer's, that I went through all of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of denial, anger, grief, and acceptance. And I would say, with my own physical condition, I would say the same. So there's no quick solutions. There's no quick way of thinking that all of a sudden changes everything. It takes time. It really does. But I'm in a good place.
Good.
So
I am so thankful that you are in a good place. That is wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah.
You share many powerful vignettes in Riding the Edge, describing the sometimes subtle and often not so subtle challenges that couples face in communicating their needs. What are some of the lessons that you learned about this that you could share with others?
One, sometimes it's good to keep your mouth shut.
Yes, I agree.
I'm not being real profound with that, but you know what? Don't always say what you feel. Sometimes let it settle inside of you and show some self-control and discipline. I think that a long-term marriage relationship demands many qualities, one of which is discipline, knowing when to speak and when to be quiet. So I would say one of the things that I learned, because there's, the whole experience in Paris, and when Deborah went off to Sweden to see an old friend of hers, was not easy for me. But I will say in retrospect, I'm proud of myself the way I dealt with it. I had two women in Paris who were kind of giving me a lot of support about what to do and teaching me a lot about female psychology. And I was smart enough to listen to them. And because I think if I listened to my male ego only exclusively, I would have made all sorts of real big mistakes and I would have lost Deborah. But I didn't, when I wrote this book, and I was thinking, what do I include and what do I include? I wasn't looking to write, some kind of a, erotic romance tale, but I did want to write something that was real. And any person with any sense of experience about relationships knows that you cannot do what we did, which is ride a bicycle for 3,000 miles and not have relationship challenges. And we had our relationship challenges, and they weren't easy ones. The relationship almost came to an end in Paris. And we managed to work it through. And we managed to work it through in part because of my ability I had at the time, which was to step back and use my brains and think and not act precipitously. I sometimes wonder where I found the strength to do that, but I think I loved Deborah so much and was so afraid of losing her that I didn't want to blow it.
I think the greatest advice that can come from what you just said was the old expression, listen twice, 2 ears and 1 mouth, listen twice and speak once. What would you like readers to take away from Riding the Edge, a love song to Deborah?
Basically what I write in the beginning of the book. You don't need to go around, I don't know if I wrote this, but I will say this. You don't need to go on what was starting out to be an around the world bicycle trip to find love and truth. I mean, that's, absurd. If that were the case, there's not a chance for any of us. On the other hand, wherever you are and whatever you can do with complete and 100% commitment, because that's where growth comes from. Growth comes from doing things with your heart and soul, not just doing things in a perfunctory or obligatory way. Being in the present, enjoying, as I said, whether it's food or the relationships, etc., and to live a life that's based on truth. We're not going to be here very long. We're a blink in the eye of history, and time is the only thing that we have. And I think that because time is all we have, it behooves us to use that time as effectively, as honestly, as lovingly as possible. I don't know if we get a second chance. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. But if we get a second chance, it's not in this iteration, it's in a different one. I get one chance to be Michael Tobin, and my quote unquote eternity is made in moments. And that's my suggestion to everyone. Live your life because this is what you got.
Absolutely. My guest, the wisdom of Dr. Michael Tobin, his book, Riding the Edge, a love song to Deborah. Michael, one more time, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you.
Okay. You certainly can get my book on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, Nook, a million different places, the publisher itself, as well as you can get all those links on my website, drmichaeltobin.com. In addition to which, there are many, many articles I have on that site about marriage, relationships, aging, some on travel. There are also photos on the website of Deborah and I in our 30s on our trips. So a number of people had asked me, why didn't you include photos in the book? And I said, I want the writing to speak for itself. I don't want photos to be needed to tell the story. So, but the photos are there if the reader wants to see them.
And 10% of all of the royalties from the sale of Riding the Edge will be donated to the Alzheimer's Association. Thank you for doing that.
You're welcome. Let's please God that they shall find if not in my lifetime, in the lifetime of my children, a cure for this dreaded disease.
Absolutely. Michael, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your inspiring story.
Thank you, Victor. It's a pleasure.
And thank you for joining us on Destination Unlimited. I'm Victor, the Voice, Fuhrman. Have a wonderful week.